So you want to start earning some passive income that doesn't require you to work a single minute. But there are a lot of scams out there claiming precisely that they can generate you some passive income if only you invest in them, if only you give them your money, and then, well, they keep your money and you never see them again. The three options that I'm going to show to you are real, legitimate ways to generate passive income because they are about investing money in legitimate ways. We're going to talk about those three options. We're going to talk about how we could start investing on those three options, and we're going to talk about how much money we would need to invest on each of these three investments to generate, for example, $1,000 a month. And let's just get started with the first of these three options, which is to just invest on debt. Whether it is government debt or corporate debt, you could even invest on the debt of some banks, but generally it is a good idea to focus on the debt that makes us take the least amount of risk, and that is government debt. And of course, when it comes to government debt, we could find the federal type of debt that the entire country has and that is issuing debt to investors, but you could also find this kind of debt at the state level or even municipal level. For the sake of simplicity, we're going to stick to federal level debt, which of course every country is going to issue their own debt a little bit differently. For example, residents of the US can actually invest on the US debt through a simple site like Treasury Direct. So we would be able to navigate over to treasurydirect.gov and of course create our account. But what I want to show you in this video is that there are many kinds of debt that we could be investing on. Now, there are treasury bills that allow you to invest for only 4 weeks, 8 weeks. These aren't actually ways to generate passive income. The ones that I want to show you are both bonds and TIPS, which are essentially inflation-protected bonds. The reason why these two options are great to start generating some passive income in the long term is precisely because we can invest on this type of securities for decades even, and they are very secure. TIPS even protect our money against any kind of inflation that we may experience in the next 10, 20 or 30 years. And as we saw in 2022, inflation can be a very big deal and can really impact the amount of growth that we are seeing with our money. If we want to start generating some passive income and make sure that that income doesn't lose any kind of value, those are the types of investment to consider. So, for example, if we consider bonds, again, we can find them by 20 years, 30 years, and if we take a look at the latest issue dates, which are from a couple of weeks ago, we can see that the most up-to-date interest rate is 4%. Doing the math very quickly in here, if we want $1,000 a month, that is $12,000 a year, and these bonds generate 4%, that means that we have to divide those 12,000 by 0.04. We would need $300,000 for these bonds to generate $1,000 a month in passive income for us. That is a lot of money, indeed, but you could imagine how perhaps at the same time that you have your normal active income, you can start saving some money and start investing in bonds, start investing in some other stuff. So eventually you actually have this kind of money that starts generating some actual passive income, perhaps complementing your active income that you may already have. Now, do keep in mind with bonds that this 4% is going to be the exact same thing all through maturity. That means that in the case of these 20-year bonds, from 2023 all the way to 2042, we're going to be generating that 4% interest rate, which means that for 20 years or 30 years, if we use a 30-year bond, we can guarantee that amount of income. But that is not accounting for inflation. Of course, $1,000 in 2023 is going to be very different to $1,000 in 2042, or even worse, 2052. That is where TIPS come in. Now, these TIPS or Treasury inflation protected securities work very similarly to bonds, but we can find them in 10-year, 5-year, as well as 30-year terms. But you may notice that they pay a much smaller interest rate. With 1% interest rate, we would need like $1.2 million to generate that $1,000 a month, $12,000 a year. That is terrible. The difference is that in this case, that interest rate is on top of whatever inflation happens. So if there is 10% inflation, we receive that 10% inflation plus the 1.125%. So the interest that we are seeing in these tables is the real interest, that which already accounts for inflation. Not so in the case of bonds, that is just the nominal interest. If you want a certain amount of income that is stable throughout the next years, even decades, even already accounting for inflation, then TIPS is the option for you. The second option that we have is a very, very popular one, which is real estate. But buying a house, buying an apartment, buying any kind of real estate is quite expensive and so quite difficult. It would mean that we need to save a lot of money to start generating that passive income, right? Except it wouldn't even be passive income, because as owners that rent, we would still have to collect that rent. We would still need to make sure that the place is still up and running. So maintenance and any kind of management for the property is on us. We would still have to work. That's not entirely passive. If we want actually passive income through real estate, we need to invest in something like REITs, real estate investment trusts. The real estate investment trusts handle all of that for us. They collect the rent, they manage the properties, they do the maintenance by themselves, and are required to distribute 95% of their profits to investors. So us, as investors, don't have to do absolutely anything. We give them money, they use that money to manage the properties, to buy more properties, and we receive our rent on a quarterly basis. The best way to invest on REITs, though, is to not just invest in one or two of them, but to invest in a lot of them. And there is an ETF that can help you do that. So the Vanguard Real Estate ETF, VNQ, is an ETF that for just 0.12% of fees every year will allow us to invest on 168 different holdings. That is, by the way, one of the reasons why Vanguard is just amazing. The expense ratio, the fees are so small. Now, if we want to learn a little bit more about this ETF, we could navigate over to investing.com and find that currently the dividend yield is around 5.4%, and that currently each share is currently around $91. So with just $91, we would be investing on a lot of properties around the United States. Now, with that kind of current dividend yield, 5.37%, we would need around $223,000 to start generating those $10,000 a month. Keep in mind that the dividend is paid to investors on a quarterly basis. You wouldn't actually receive the money each and every month, but you get the idea. Now, you can, of course, buy these kind of ETFs with any broker that you may have, or you could even do it directly through Vanguard, because it turns out that Vanguard themselves can offer these VNQ as a mutual fund. So if we navigate over to the Vanguard page for this VNQ ETF, we see that it is also available as an Admiral Shares mutual fund. So that is an option that we also have, and the expense ratio is going to be exactly the same, although do consider that in this case there is an investment minimum of $3,000, whereas if you buy the ETF directly, it's just the price of the ETF, which again is currently $91. Now, the third option that we have to start generating passive income is stocks. Stocks, companies, as you may be aware of, quarterly usually are going to distribute some of their profits to investors. Not every company does this. A lot of companies out there prefer to take any amount of profit and reinvest it on the business, which makes a lot of sense. But there are also companies that do distribute some of the profits to investors, and some dividend yields can get quite high. In fact, there is also a Vanguard ETF that allows you to invest on a lot of stocks, on a lot of companies that traditionally distribute high dividend yields. Again, I recommend Vanguard because of the very low fees, and the ETF that you could take a look at for these kind of high dividend yield investment is VYM. So VYM, which I have right here, has an expense ratio of 0.06%. Comparing that to some alternatives from BlackRock, for example, this is more than 6 times cheaper. More than 6 times, so this is definitely the ETF to use. So VYM again is going to allow us at once to invest on a lot of companies, in this case 443 different companies, mainly on finance, health. You can always go to etf.com/VYM to take a look at these charts, but indeed through one ETF you're going to be investing on a lot of companies. And again, we can actually navigate to the Vanguard site to see that there is also an Admiral Shares Mutual Fund. That is this one right here, but again, the investment minimum of $3,000, whereas if you use the ETF VYM, you can buy one share of the ETF for $110, and currently the dividend yield is around 3.62%, which means that you would need around $330,000 to generate $1,000 every month. Again, not that you get paid every month. These dividends are usually again paid on a quarterly basis. So with this amount of money invested, you would receive $3,000 a quarter, which is equal to $1,000 a month. Anyway, you get the idea as well. So those are the 3 legitimate options that we have to generate passive income. But before finishing up this video, I do want to warn you that using these investments as passive income means that you lose on compound interest, that 8th wonder of the world that makes your money grow faster and faster the longer it is invested. So if with any of these options you start taking the interest or the rent or the dividend and spend it because you consider that as part of your income, that money wouldn't be reinvested and it wouldn't grow as fast as if instead you would take that interest, that rent or that dividend, and put it back on the same kind of investment, the bonds or the tips or the rates or the ETFs or in any other kind of investment. The reason why I'm saying this is because when you are young, perhaps you are not yet thinking about retirement, or retirement is just so far away in the future. Instead of trying to generate passive income in this way, I think you should focus on increasing your active or semi-active income and using part of that income to invest on this or other kinds of stuff. That way you make sure that that money grows as fast as possible, and eventually once you retire in 10 or 20 or 40 years, you would have so much more money. So while these options are great to generate passive income, I don't see them as options that you would use now. One, because you would need a lot of money to start generating some actual passive income like we just saw. But 2, because the amount of passive income that you would generate in the future if you leave this money reinvested instead of using it as income would be so much bigger. Now, I am going to make a couple of videos in the near future, about how I personally have created semi-passive income. So if you want to see those videos, make sure that you are subscribed. For example, I am going to make a video about how I started selling an Excel template, literally an Excel template, and that generated me $4,000 in 4 months, so $1,000 a month actually. And I'm also going to make a video a little bit more anecdotal about how I, in my now 8 years of experience making money online, was able to create 3 different streams of income, each of which generates $1,000 a month. So if you want to hear those stories, you want to learn what tools I used, make sure that you are subscribed. But that is it for this video. Hopefully those 3 options allow you to understand a bit more about how is it that in the future or currently, if you want to, you could generate some passive income, and you realize that if something sounds too good to be true compared to these options, that is probably right. It is not true. It is probably a scam. Keep away from those opportunities that sound too good to be true. Anyway, catch you in the next one.